reaffirm this important bond, and we take the next steps to make our relationship closer, stronger, and more powerful than ever before.
I'd love to have a big, beautiful jet that's built in the United States of America.
House Republicans are trying to jam another GOP tax scam down the throats of the American people.
Every single American, 207 million taxpayers, will face a 22% tax increase. So failure's not an option.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, a royal welcome. What does it look like? Well, from a fighter jet escort to a lavender carpet to Arabian horses alongside the presidential limousine. We also call that the Beast. The president, as you know, loves pageantry, and he saw plenty of it as he was welcomed to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. But far more importantly, the chess pieces of the Middle East, military, diplomatic, and investment, are moving rapidly and possibly with historic consequences. President Trump, for better or worse, is at the center of all this. The consequences for Israel, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Turkey, and many other countries in the region, well, they could be profound. Today, Trump lifted U.S. sanctions on Syria, giving the loosely formed government arising from the murderous Assad family dictatorship a vital economic lifeline and a diplomatic seal of approval. The president also lavished praise on Saudi Arabia and heralded billions in arms sales, underscoring Trump's visibly transactional relationship with the kingdom and its de facto leader, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, whom he praised as a, quote, incredible man, adding, quote, there's nobody like him. Former President Biden, it's worth remembering, once sought to isolate Saudi Arabia as a pariah for its checkered human rights record, and that's being generous, and its role in the murder of U.S. journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Trump family business interests also hovered nearby this visit to Saudi Arabia. The Trump family began exploring investment opportunities during the first Trump term. The relationships have only matured since, with luxury skyscrapers, golf courses, and cryptocurrency all in the mix. Lastly, there's the jet. The Boeing 747 the government of Qatar wants to give to Trump, an opulent gift that very well may violate federal law and any sense of remaining propriety we have about such things. Qatar has financially backed Hamas, you see, and that's why another big event in the region this week, the release Monday of Idan Alexander, the last living U.S. hostage by Hamas, did not include his family meeting Trump in Qatar. It was simply too much for the Alexanders to bear. The Qatari jet may also be too much for congressional Republicans who sound on the Hill more than slightly queasy about the spectacle and the perceived ethical sludge that might come with it. Finn Gomez and Aaron Navarro are covering the president's trip. Let's start tonight with Aaron Navarro at the White House. Aaron, what's on your mind?
Major, good to be with you. I think the big news out of about that hour-long speech that the president gave at that summit in Saudi Arabia was the announcement of the removing of sanctions on Syria. These are sanctions that have been in place since the civil war in Syria started around 2011 and really hampered the nation's economy that just got out of the Bashar al-Assad regime a couple months ago. But President Trump, in his speech announcing it, said that these sanctions were, quote, brutal and crippling and served as an important function at the time. But now it's time for the country to, quote, shine, talking about the country shining economically, growing economically, which really tied into Trump's whole speech and vision for the Middle East that he said at that summit, talking about how the Middle East should be defined by, quote, commerce, not chaos. He really praised Saudi Arabia and economic developments they've made, at one point saying that it's the other, quote, hottest country in the world right now, praising, as you mentioned, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And all of this coming as President Trump is expected to at least say hello to the new Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa tomorrow in Saudi Arabia, according to the White House. Notable that the U.S. in the first place is looking to normalize relations with Syria, and comes at a time when you see conflicts in Gaza as well as the ongoing negotiations with Iran.
Aaron Navarro at the White House, thank you very much. Finn Gomez joins me now here at the D.C. Bureau. Finn, what's on your mind?
Well, I think it's really interesting what Aaron just said concerning Syria. As you know, we've essentially had sanctions put on place on Syria since 1979, when the U.S. designated it as a state sponsor of terrorism. It really was increased in 2011 after the Syrian civil war. And this is a pretty significant development, as you know, Major, the fact that he announced this today. But it's also significant for another reason, Major, and that is really to highlight the closeness of President Trump, the relationship that he has with MBS, with the Crown Prince. He himself said it during his remarks that it was because of his relationship with the Crown Prince, and said he was an incredible man. It just goes to show overall, this trip really highlights how close these two countries are, especially if you compare it to like previous administrations, even the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, Major.
And Finn, you and I have paid a lot of attention to how candidate Trump talks about foreign policy and how President Trump talks about foreign policy. And there was a whole section in his remarks today talking about how previous interventionists in the region, not understanding the region, had tried to impose things and done more harm than good. Basically saying, I'm going to let this region sort things out on its own terms, and America will be there in a business sense, but not going to wag any fingers of condemnation about human rights or other things. That seemed to me a pretty significant part of the speech.
No, I agree, Major, and it was, and especially, again, if you compare it to, contrast it to the Biden administration, the Obama administration, even the Bush administration, where that was really, they really did have a different focus, but essentially saying, hey, hands off, you do what you want, and we will, and really kind of focusing on this isolationist perspective that the president and his administration has had since the advent of Trump 2.0. But really, we've heard him campaign on this message throughout the 2024 cycle. So it's not a surprise, but it's now a part of his execution implementing the Trump foreign policy in the Middle East region. It does come at a time of heightened tension in the region, as you know, especially with Israel and Hamas, and of course in the background we also have the Russia and Ukraine talks happening in Turkey later this week. So it's really a time where Trump's foreign policy and how much it contrasts with previous administrations really comes to fruition here. We're really seeing it under a pretty much a spotlight, and really, again, showing that contrast. Major.
Finn Gomez, thanks so very much. Former Special Envoy for Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, Frank Lowenstein, joins me now. Frank, it's great to have you. Pick up on the thing that you heard in the speech we were talking about before we went on air, that the president saying the Arabian way, the way you want to do it, how you want to develop, how you want to handle your things internally, fine by us.
Yeah, a really interesting speech in that regard. He effectively upended decades of U.S. foreign policy doctrine in the region, declaring that a values-based approach based on promoting human rights and democracy had been a failure. Whereas prior presidents went to Amman and Cairo, Trump is in Riyadh and Doha and Dubai because that's where the money is, and that's what he really wants to make the focus of this trip. And
Israel's not on this trip.
Yeah, not only is Israel not on the trip, but he's doing a whole bunch of different things that the Israelis will absolutely hate. Just recent announcement on the Syria sanctions.
Why? Tell my audience why that matters to the Israelis.
Because the Israelis are very concerned. Al-Shara, the president of Syria, was formerly the head of an ISIS-affiliated terrorist organization in Syria. So the Israelis are very, very anxious about what his real agenda is.
Now, he says he's trying to turn over a new leaf, but, you know, the Israelis would be legitimately concerned about that, and still are.
There was a bit of a conversion on the road to Damascus for Al-Shara.
Quite literally.
Yeah, no, exactly. He gave a whole bunch of interviews saying, hey, you know, that was in the past. And listen, I think that there's a very good case to be made that lifting sanctions is the right thing to do here, to give the Syrian economy a chance to survive, if not thrive. We were in Syria, Secretary Kerry and I, 4 or 5 times trying to persuade then President Bashar al-Assad to change his position, to come more into alignment with you know, Jordan and Egypt and less so with Iran. And the tool that we had at our disposal was the removal of sanctions. And we made the case that, hey, listen, if you demonstrate with actions that you are prepared to move in a different direction, we will reciprocate with the removal of sanctions. But there was a very clear quid pro quo there. Trump just threw all that out the window. Like, hey, you know, MBS asked me to do this. Erdogan likes the guy.
And Turkey wants some, right, exactly.
Yeah, so I'm going to just go for it without any normal interagency process or anything along the lines of what prior presidents.
Talk to me about Israeli concerns about direct negotiations, Trump administration to Hamas on Idan Alexander's release, and possible implied or real pressure from the Trump administration to accept a ceasefire and a resumption of humanitarian assistance for Palestinians.
Yeah, that's a great question. It actually goes back to before Trump even took office. He put a lot of pressure on the Israelis to accept a ceasefire agreement that President Biden had not been able to get them to accept over the course of 9 months. Witkoff just showed up in Israel and told
Steve Witkoff, special envoy.
Right, my president, this is what's going to happen, and you're going to fall in line. And then they subsequently had direct negotiations with Hamas behind Israel's back. Israel found out about that through intel channels with respect to Idan Alexander and advancing the ceasefire. And then they've just done it again. They made a side deal with the Houthis, right, which effectively said, stop bombing shipping lanes that are important for commerce and U.S. economic interests, and you can continue to send missiles at Ben Gurion Airport. Really sort of a shocking deal to be made. And now, Trump has came up very publicly and said this brutal war needs to end in Gaza. He wants to get all the hostages out, and he wants a sustainable peace over there. That is exactly the opposite of what Netanyahu wants. He's planning to resume a massive ground invasion the minute Trump leaves. So, it's a whole different ballgame for Netanyahu.
Do you think the Israelis are surprised by where they find themselves vis-a-vis Trump 2.0?
Yeah, I think they're very surprised. I think in the first term, they really got Trump to do more or less exactly what they wanted to. Ron Dermer was in the White House all the time, really, sort of dictating a lot of what our policy was going to be, recognizing Jerusalem.
And Ron Dermer is and was?
Netanyahu's chief advisor, right?
Right.
But we effectively,
and he was here last week trying to find out what the situation was going to be.
Yeah, it's a very different world than the one I think they expected to enter into, right? In the first term, Trump was foursquare with them on whatever they wanted to do. Including annexations in the West Bank, which they didn't follow through on, but Trump was supportive. So I think they expected that they would get the Trump administration to fall in line with whatever Netanyahu wanted to do. His primary goal is to bomb the Iranian nuclear facilities. Netanyahu's been very clear about that. That's exactly the opposite of what Trump is trying to do in the region. And by the way, exactly the opposite of what the Saudis and the Emiratis, another one, they don't want, whereas previously they were very hawkish on Iran. Now they want peace. They want stability because it's better for business.
And Trump, in his remarks today, and everyone is sort of sifting them in different ways. Was he being hawkish on Iran? Was he being dovish on Iran? He was being a little bit of both, saying the deal's not going to be on the table forever, but I want to make sure things are good, and I like peace, and even our former rivals are now friends of ours. Yeah. What does it sound like to you? And what do you think the outlines of a deal might possibly be with Iran?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would put Trump's rhetoric aside. He's been very clear. As one often should. He's been very clear that he doesn't want war with Iran right now. So to an extent, he's reciting talking points that are important, I think, for the Israelis to hear. But his actions suggest that he's looking for a deal here that would be exactly the opposite of what Netanyahu wants. That would take military action against Iran right off the table. And I think for the Israelis, it's a different ballgame politically as well.
And very quickly, that Iran deal, as you're imagining it, might look a lot like the deal that either preceded the Obama negotiated deal or the Obama negotiated deal, which Trump criticized so vehemently and pulled out of once he was in office the first time around.
Exactly. And one might ask, well, how can he enter into a deal that's far worse than the one he criticized President Biden for entering into? And the answer is he can say whatever he wants. And his people will go along with him. And no Republicans in Congress will dare criticize him. Netanyahu can't even criticize him because Trump is more popular in Israel than he is. So we're seeing a very different dynamic than the one we've seen in the past, in terms of the politics around Israel.
Frank, great to have you at the table. Thanks so much. I hope you come back.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
New data today shows the inflation that cooled last month just a bit. The president rolled out his sweeping tariffs. All the while, we're going to look at how investors reacted to that data and much more on the U.S. economy when we come back right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Inflation last month, slightly lower than experts predicted. Today, the president claimed, well, it was even better than it looked.
Groceries, gasoline, energy, and all other prices are down with no inflation. We have no inflation.
In fact, the Consumer Price Index rose 2.2% month over month. It also increased 2.3% on a yearly basis. CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady joins me now from Studio 57. Kelly, break it all down for us. What is most interesting to you about this new batch of data?
So overall, it was actually quite a good report. I think any other month, any other time, this would give a green light to the Federal Reserve to actually lower interest rates because we are moving closer to that 2% target. Lowest annual number when it comes to inflation we have seen since February 2021. But the big question is, well, are tariffs going to impact this? The most interesting part of the report was vehicle parts, auto parts. That actually rose 2.2% on a monthly basis. And as you just said, the monthly number on average was 0.2%. So that's a huge jump. And that's where you're starting to see the tariff impact creep in. Because remember, we had the 10% tariff on China go into effect at the beginning of February. Then it got up to 20%. Now it's at 30%, down from 145. It does show you we're starting to see the impacts of tariffs. And we're going to see more and more as months go on how that's going to flow through to other sectors.
And Kelly, I've been reading that one of the reasons that this data came in as positively as it did was there was a lot of pulling forward of inventory, meaning inventory was enlarged, meaning there was more available for consumers to buy in anticipation of tariffs, which meaning all that inventory was sort of at the old pre-tariff prices, meaning more stable than they otherwise might have been. True?
That's exactly right. And I went and I said, okay, I got to see what new cars look like. Because in theory, that 25% tariff went into effect in March. You would likely see a big increase there. It was flat, 0.0%. And that's because, to your point, there was a lot of inventory. People went out, bought cars and things ahead of that deadline. And we have seen a lot of other sectors import goods. That's why GDP was negative the first quarter, because that surge in imports. And that's reflected in these prices have stayed stable ahead of potential increases over the coming months.
And there really is no way to look into this data and peer into our inflationary future, though, is there?
I wish, right? I wish I had a crystal ball. I would be able to time the market major. No, and that's exactly why the Federal Reserve is going to hold interest rates positive or hold interest rates steady, because they don't know what the impact is going to be in the coming months.
Always a pleasure. Kelly O'Grady, thanks so much for breaking it down. Setting the stage for a possible second presidential bid? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Pete Buttigieg. Does he have an answer? Well, he's in Iowa for his first in-person event since President Trump's return to the White House. Plus, the president's agenda faces a big test today on Capitol Hill as House committees begin to iron out the details of a very large and significant tax cut bill. Our Nicole Killian tracking the latest. She joined us next right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. We sort of talked about this before we went to break. But here's a question. Is the shadow campaign, and it's not really a shadow campaign, is the campaign for the 2028 Democratic nomination already sort of maybe slightly underway? Well, one of the reasons we're asking, former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg is in Iowa. You might remember he ran in 2020. He's headlining a voter town hall, and he won the Iowa caucuses in that election year of 2020. Meanwhile, Arizona freshman Senator Ruben Gallego held an event in Pennsylvania over the weekend telling Democrats gathered, quote, "We did this to ourselves," meaning losing the White House in November. I want to bring in our political panel. Chuck Rocha, CBS News political contributor, newly minted one, former senior advisor on Senator Bernie Sanders' presidential campaigns, both of them. And Rena Shaw served as a senior advisor to many Republican members of Congress. Chuck, it's great to see you. Great to have you here with us. Talk to me about Pete Buttigieg, and then also what the DNC decided to do last night, which was to vacate 2 elections for vice chair and put David Hogg on some kind of icebergs for a moment or two.
First, let's go back to the fact-checking, since I'm a CBS person here now, to make sure that we get the 2020 primary in Iowa right. I was there. We didn't have a winner that night, but it all ended up being an exact tie on delegates. So he did not win. It was a tie. Not that I'm bitter at all, maybe a little bit.
Who did he tie with?
Ooh, he tied with Bernie Sanders. That's how I know. Because I was the one, here you go, behind the scenes.
Control room, did you hear that? You hear that rage coming out of his ears and eyes and nostrils?
And I said to Bernie, I was like, get out there. Get out there and own this. Get out there and say that we won, because we had more people that voted for him that night. But again, to everybody, it's about the delegates. Yep. It was about the delegates. The delegates end up being even. But Iowa, to your point, is where it all begins. You're going to start seeing folks like him show up in Iowa. Pritzker was just in New Hampshire.
J.B.
So,
Pritzker,
yes,
governor of
we're
Illinois.
well in the groove of running a presidential primary, just putting out feelers, mainly for donors, mainly to get their name out there, mainly so folks like us will talk about it on these news channels. That's what we're doing right now.
And David Hogg and what the DNC did last night, vacating an election that made him a vice chair?
Right, and I think that's something to keep around. That had started before he actually got out there and said he was going to primary Democrats, but it was handy for them to use to say, well, maybe we should really look at this grievance and have a rerun of this election, because there had been folks who said they weren't done right in that election. That weren't David Hogg or the gentleman from Philadelphia who actually won with him.
Is this something that means David Hogg could lose his role within the DNC?
If he doesn't get enough votes, he could actually lose if it goes to the full DNC for a vote. Can you imagine what we'll be talking about if that was to happen? Even though this started before he ever said he would start primarying Democrats, that's something to really keep an eye on.
Rena, when you see Democrats not only revisiting hesitantly everything that went wrong in 2024, but now having these internal, seemingly endless fights over procedure, process, and the like, you think what?
I think Republicans are gleeful, and I think they should be, because this is a eating your own moment, which is unnecessary. David Hogg came out and said what I think a lot of people were thinking. But
meaning Democrats were thinking.
And Republicans, too, that why don't you guys learn something from 2024? Show that you can evolve. And this was the kind of moment where if you don't have somebody who's coming in here ready to change things in a really dynamic way, then you're never going to have change. You're never going to learn from your mistakes. I went through this with the RNC in 2012 when there was an autopsy report. And a lot of us said, hey, this autopsy report is fine, but what are we going to do beyond it? And there wasn't much learning, but then there was a moment of luck, as we all know, in 2016 with Trump coming in. So with Hogg being, I think, an outsider, somebody that represents something new and different, it's a breath of fresh air. I say let it play out. And Republicans are going to sit by the sidelines and laugh.
Let me make sure I translate properly. Breath of fresh air. That's a Democrat spending $20 million against other Democrat incumbents. That's a Republican definition of Democratic fresh air, isn't it?
It is, and it's unusual, isn't it? But if that's what we think needs to happen for there to be a whole new bench of people that are looked at to come to D.C. and really not just do what I think a lot of Democrats did when Biden was in the White House, go and kiss the ring over and over, and probably just really get people challenging what the Democrats can be for in this moment. Can they be for the blue-collar voters that went for Trump? I think so, but they're not gaming it right.
Speaking of the former president, President Joe Biden, and those who were endorsing him, at least nominally, back in 2024, but before things took a very awkward turn, the Democratic leader in the Senate, Charles Schumer, was asked a kind of uncomfortable question today. I want the audience hear the question and his very short response. Let's play it.
You said in June of last year, in my meetings with President Biden, I found him to be in command and impressive and wielding influence to make progress on key priorities. But in that same month, Biden apparently did not even recognize George Clooney in a fundraiser. Were you being straight with the American public?
Look, we're just looking forward.
Were you being straight with the American public? Look, we're just looking forward. Chuck?
Look, there was a big political article wrote this weekend about this exact thing because Joe Biden showed up on The View. He did a BBC interview. He's kind of reemerged because I think there's a lot of press coming out and to defend the president of folks reporting off the record things with Jake Tapper's book and other books that are coming out. So he's trying to get out and create their narrative. I respect that. What worries me as a Democrat, and I was quoted in the piece saying that every day we're here on the news talking about Joe Biden, we're not talking about what we're doing to help working families, what we're doing with our vision.
But there's a conversation in the Democratic Party about accountability for what didn't happen in 2024, didn't happen in 2023.
Exactly.
Does that need to be surfaced?
It should be surfaced around one thing. Joe Biden is going to go away, and he's going to go away and retire, just like Obama did and Clinton did. What we should talk about are the power structure around him that hasn't gone away, Major. To your point, where's the accountability with the consultants who may have held something back from the American people, who are today working on every Democratic campaign in the country?
Chuck, if I may, you and I both know it's about trust at the end of the day. And with what was a coronation of Harris, when she was polling at something like 21% of voters in a 2024 poll wanted her, and Buttigieg was something like at 10%, you saw how thin the bench of leaders was within the Democratic Party, I think. But at the end of the day, it did come down to trust. Did they trust the party after what they did with Harris, just putting her up there when it felt like nobody really wanted her? And then a president president that frankly wasn't really fit for the job in the last months? I think it's a conversation that needs to happen. I get that people are frustrated, but people deserve the truth. And they see Trump out there, the loudmouth that he is, being open and showing all his cards every day of the week. That's
Rena,
the
let's
contrast.
Talk briefly about the present. Lots of Republicans I've talked to say, look, the sum total of President Trump's first year and almost all of his second year agenda is in this reconciliation bill. It's all there. And failure is not an option. But what does success ultimately look like? That's what House Republicans are trying to sort out, and they're not there yet.
No.
And the sorting out.
So
what are the
messy.
stakes involved here?
3 key committees marking it up as we speak, talking about gutting Medicaid in a way that is no good for anyone. Look, I'm from Southern West Virginia, born and raised, and there are people there who rely on Medicaid. It is their lifeblood. I come from a medical family, married to medicine, daughter of, sister of. And I can tell you, Medicare beneficiaries that need to use Medicaid too, we never talk about that here in Washington. The millions of Americans whose lives will drastically change because of conditions like the one I have, a thyroid condition, for example. These things all come into play when you talk about needy people who are the most vulnerable, who will not get what they need to function
So you're
daily.
telling Republicans, be careful. On Medicaid.
I am with the moderates on this one. Those New York Republicans that have a lot of leverage right now, by the way, because of SALT caps, they have leverage on this issue about gutting Medicaid because they don't want a tough vote. They don't want to pass something in the House that's only going to get reworked in the Senate. They don't deserve these tough votes. These are
Chuck,
blue state Republicans.
I'm going to have to do something I hate to do. I'm going to have to silence you, at least for the moment. Jesus, Lord. But you'll be back, and I'll give you so much room. I'll give you so much room.
Y'all heard it here first. We're going to hold him to it.
Chuck Rocha, thank you very much. Speaking of those 3 committees on the House side, working on the Republicans' budget and tax bill, well, those panels have been working through some of the thorniest parts of that very large legislative package, including, as was just mentioned by Rena, Medicaid reductions. Nicole Killian joins us now from Capitol Hill. Nicole, catch us up.
Yeah, well, right now, as you mentioned, those committee markups continue, and the one for Energy and Commerce has been pretty heated as, of course, Democrats really try to draw attention to what some of these Medicaid cuts might do. They've been holding up signs. They've been reading testimony from various constituents, at one point even trying to adjourn the committee hearing. But that being said, look, what we do know is that this proposal encompasses about $715 billion in proposed cuts to the Medicaid program. And even though that's not as deep as some thought it would be, it still could potentially have an impact. I had a chance to travel outside of the nation's capital to Winchester, Virginia, where there is an extensive rural hospital system there, Valley Health. I spoke with the CEO about what these cuts could mean to him as well as to a Medicaid recipient. Take a listen.
When folks in Congress are calling Medicaid direct payment programs fraud, waste, and abuse, money laundering, I mean, that's just it's simply not true. But if that were to go away, then again, I go from immediately to about a $65 million loss a year. There's a chance we can't fulfill our mission.
Even with the smallest of cuts, that could cause states to restrict their programs. And then people like me that are working might get left out. You know, and that's just what concerns me the most.
So in terms of Yoli, the patient you heard from there, she's concerned about potentially losing her coverage, which pays for a lot of her medications right now. In the case of the CEO, obviously, he's concerned about potentially losing some payment, although he has been coming here to Capitol Hill pretty regularly to lobby lawmakers and says it's just about trying to find a workable solution, but hoping that these cuts don't cut too deep.
Nicole, what about the tax rate structures of this bill? President Trump has suggested at the very teeny margins and a kind of a small voice, a little bit unusual for him, that he might be open to raising rates on the wealthiest.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I actually asked the White House press secretary about that late last week, and as you mentioned, the president nodded to it. But I did have a chance to ask the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, Jason Smith, who met with the president this past Friday, why he didn't include those provisions to increase that tax bracket, increase the tax rate for the highest earners. And this is what he told me. Take a listen.
If you look at our bill, we're delivering on the president's priorities. I sat with him on Friday, and I went line by line of the different items in this bill, and he was very happy with what we're delivering.
So he insists that the president's on board, even though it didn't include that increase. I would note, though, this does include many of the president's campaign promises and priorities. No taxes on tips, no taxes on overtime, obviously extending his tax cuts, key pledge. So from that standpoint, the chairman is moving forward with this package.
With perspective outside and inside the Beltway, Nicole Killian, as always, thank you very much. Biden administration offered a safe haven for thousands of Afghans who said they were at risk if returned home. Now the Trump administration is ending those protections. Next, we'll take a look at what's behind this key immigration decision right here on America Decides. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. The Trump administration is ending a program offering deportation protections for Afghans. Afghanistan's temporary protected status expires in May, with the Department of Homeland Security announcing it is terminating the program as of early July. It allows migrants to obtain work permits and therefore avoid being deported. Sean Van Diver joins me now. He is the president and board chair of Afghan Evac, a nonprofit formed during the United States withdrawal from Afghanistan that works with the U.S. government to support Afghans. Sean, it's good to have you with us. Our numbers at CBS say this would implicate about 8,000. You say 11,000. What accounts for that discrepancy?
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much, Major, for having me on today to talk about this. The numbers are a little bit squishy, right? The Department of Homeland Security isn't sharing a lot of accurate facts and figures. We know that there were some number of Afghans, about 8,000, who had approved TPS and were awaiting a green card or asylum. We know that there were some number, about 5,000 Afghans who had pending TPS and were awaiting and had asylum or green card. And then varying degrees of 1,000 or 1,200. All told, it's about 14,000 people who are impacted, but a very small number of people only have TPS and haven't yet applied for an adjustment of status. Now, those who have applied for adjustment of status, asylum or green card, should still be able to stay here. They need to consult their immigration attorneys.
Talk to my audience about who these Afghans are and what we once promised them.
Sure. So these Afghans are folks who arrived in many cases during the withdrawal from Afghanistan back in August of 2021. These are folks who stood with us over 20 years of war. They were interpreters, drivers. They were lawyers and prosecutors who put the Taliban away. These are folks who, for one reason or another, because of their relationship to the United States of America, are now in danger. And if they go back, they're facing certain death.
Now, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says they're not facing anything. The economic conditions have improved. Their threat of violence is mitigated. Therefore, they don't need temporary protected status. They have nothing to fear going back. How would you respond?
I would say that's just simply not true. We are getting reports every day of people who have been killed, who have been tortured, who have been maimed, who have been intimidated and harassed. And look, if I would love to invite Secretary Noem to join me to go to Afghanistan. It's not safe for me to go there either. It's probably not safe for her. But if she thinks it's safe, which it sounds like she does, I would invite her to join me and we'll go to Afghanistan. I've already called the logistics providers. We can go set it up. And if she believes it's safe, we can go out there. As a woman, she's not allowed to have her voice heard. She's not allowed to take a bath. She's not allowed to be seen in public. She's not allowed to work. It's just simply insane to believe that things have changed for the better in Afghanistan for people who have a relationship with the United States of America.
Sean, one of the criticisms I've heard about this program is that some of the Afghans who might be in that large number, 8,000, then 5,000, maybe another 1,000, some of them are gaming the system, that they weren't interpreters, they weren't lawyers, they weren't drivers. They just would like to come to America, and they're trying to represent themselves as something they actually weren't when we needed them most. How would you respond to that?
I'd say that that's probably a very small number, and even if that is true, these are folks who were brought here by the United States of America. They didn't just pop up here, right? They were brought here by the United States of America during our withdrawal. And now they've been here for 3.5 years. We broke it, we bought it, right? We owe it to these folks to keep them safe. Now they've been in America for 3.5 years. If we sent them back, they're gonna die. If they got through the gates at the airport, that's the United States of America's fault. That's Joe Biden's fault, right? He should have done a better job of making sure that everybody who was on that plane was a wartime ally. But the truth is that everybody who was on that plane now has a relationship with the United States of America. And the folks that didn't have some sort of claim or just fleeing Afghanistan is a very small number. The bulk of people that are impacted by this are folks who stood up for the idea of America, fought for our ideals, and are now at risk because of their relationship to us.
And Sean, briefly, how would you describe their resettlement process here in the last 3 years?
It's been rough, right? The Biden administration had to rebuild after the first time the Trump administration deconstructed resettlement and refugee processes. It took a while. They were humming along at 5,000 Afghans leaving Kabul a month on 28 flights, going to a third country, and then coming here. The resettlement system was humming, and they just shut it down again on January 20th and then canceled all of the contracts. So, look, it was a system that was working, however imperfectly. We hoped that President Trump and Secretary Noem and Secretary Rubio would improve it, but they didn't. And if you're pissed off about that, go to AfghanEvac.org and stand with us, and we're going to keep pushing.
Sean Van Diver, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
She is a far-right conspiracy theorist who has President Trump's ear. Next, we're going to speak to a journalist who sat down with the person I just described, Laura Loomer. More on what she had to say about her influence within the White House. Is it growing? And if so, to what effect? That's next, right here on America Decides.
What do they say that if you want loyalty and you're in Washington, D.C., get a dog? Well, I have 4 dogs, right? Because I don't like dealing with people.
That's Laura Loomer. Welcome back, by the way. She doesn't like people, as she just said, but she is a big fan of President Trump and often has influence within the Trump White House. A recent meeting between her and the president resulted in several firings on the National Security Council. But recently, very recently, Loomer did break with the president over his plans to accept a jumbo jet from Qatar. Tara Palmieri recently spoke with Laura Loomer. She is the author of The Red Letter on Substack and hosts the Tara Palmieri Show on YouTube. Tara, it's great to have you with us. You talked to Laura Loomer about why she doesn't have a job in the White House. Let's listen.
Yeah. The president always says whenever we have these meetings, oh, hire her, and then they say, oh, don't worry, she's already, we're already in the process of that. But then nothing ever happens. So I don't know. It's very strange. My press pass request also hasn't been approved yet.
How do you digest all that, Tara? Is she that influential, or is she influential on a moment-by-moment basis?
That's a good way to put it, Major. Thanks for having me on the show. It is hard to kind of understand, right, how influential Laura Loomer is. But, I mean, if someone can walk into the Oval Office and they can get the national security advisor to fire basically a huge chunk of his security apparatus, overruling him in that meeting. I mean, I would say you have a lot of power. She was allowed inside of the Oval Office. She gave the president information that made him make major hiring decisions. So I don't think that we can minimize that power. I think Laura knows how to play to Trump's heartstrings, which is loyalty above all. And she's able to prove to him that people around him are disloyal to him. And he trusts her because of that. I think he's a deeply suspicious person. And I think that Laura understands that. And she spends a lot of her time trying to find information that shows him that he can't trust the people around him.
In that vein, Tara, and I think you're dead on with that, she describes herself as a journalist, but to me, she's more of a really aggressive opposition researcher for one client, Donald Trump. One client and one client only, and she has used that opposition research to go after those in the Republican Party who at any time in their career, any time at all, ever crossed President Trump. Listen to how she describes it.
J.D. Vance at least admits that he was wrong, right? He's not running from it. He at least admitted that he made these comments about President Trump. These other people, on the other hand, are trying to pretend like they're Trump loyalists. They're trying to pretend like they've never said anything derogatory, or that they're working in the best interest of President Trump, or they completely disowned him after the January 6th protests at the Capitol. And then, after the election, they came back trying to wiggle their way in.
So, Tara, is she trying to create a kind of Laura Loomer seal of approval?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, like she decides who she thinks is worthy of being around Trump and who's not. I think there's like a feeling that she's shown attrition. She has this bar for neoconservatives. I mean, she thinks that anyone who has any connection to the prior administration, the George W. Bush administration, the Biden administration, the Obama administration, they should be nowhere near the White House. Even if they were civil servants, they were people who were, not supposed to be in political roles. I mean, one of the guys that was fired, he just so happened to be the son of someone who worked for Dick Cheney. Like he basically had to pay for the sins of his father. And so, Laura, I mean, she has a way with President Trump, though. I mean, the people around him don't want her around. And they were nervous, like when this interview was about to come out, they were nervous about what she was going to say about them and if it was going to get back to President Trump, because they realized she does have a level of power with him. He does respect her. And she wanted to be in the White House. And I know what you mean when you said she should have been a journalist. I think she would have liked to have been his press secretary, maybe. I think she would have liked to be at that podium or be a senior advisor. There were many times where he said, I'll bring you on, and she was blocked. Whether he was okay with that, and he was just sort of placating her, it's unclear. But there's a feeling, I think, that she feels that she's being left out. And just now, I mean, she's turned on him for wanting to take that $400 million jet from Qatar. Too slimy for Laura, so...
Exactly. As you know, Tara, this is a time of maximum political fluidity. And you talked to Lindy Lee, who was a Democratic surrogate during the campaign. She's now marketing promoting herself as a conservative, maybe neo-Trumpist. You had a conversation with her. Let's take a listen to some of that.
Who did you vote for? People change or evolve over time.
It's fair. People can totally change, but the question is, you worked for a campaign.
I didn't have a choice because I was a Democratic.
Nobody has to work.
You're not getting it. Politics is my entire life. What do I do without politics?
So you don't believe what you're doing?
Are you like, should I become a teacher or something? Are you asking me to change my profession?
I actually think that if you're gonna stand up and speak for other people as a surrogate, if you're gonna work for a campaign, and now you're going to come out with a book, like, you should believe in what you're saying. Like, if you didn't believe in it then, how are we supposed to believe you now?
This is my truth. Take it or leave it. I don't need you, Tara Palmieri. I don't need you to believe me.
Tara, you've got 5 seconds to wrap that up. I mean that, 5 seconds. I'm sorry.
Your truth. I mean, is it the truth? I think she's got a show now on a right-wing network. She's got millions of people following her, and that's why...
So it's working. Tara, we'll have you back. I promise. We will have you back. That does it for me today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report's coming up next on CBS News 24/7.